welcome back. Man, we have a guest for you today. My next guest is a member of the Mahopac or Mahopac Writers Group. An amazing person, interesting. Her passions are worth hearing. My name is Dacquino. Our next guest is Priscilla Goldfarb.
Hi, Vin.
Priscilla, I had to have you on this show because you are a very interesting, intriguing young lady. Talk to me about who Priscilla is and about some of the things you have passions for.
Well, I could say you're a very intriguing person yourself, Vinny, which is one of the reasons why I'm here. And I'm here partly because of one of my passions, which is libraries. I am a great lover of libraries. I'm a great user of libraries. And as of last year, I have been one of the 3 representatives from Putnam County on the Mid-Hudson Library System Board.
Wow.
It's
a lot of books.
It's a lot of books, but libraries are so much more than books, really.
Yeah,
and for me, one of the great things about them is they're open to everyone. They're one of the great democratic institutions, and that's where the facts are. That's where the ideas are, and you can go for books, for tapes, for programs at any age.
One of the reasons I am so proud to be a Mahopacian is the center of Mahopac, which is, by the way, a hamlet, not even a village, a hamlet, has the most wonderful library. That library is the community center, the heart of the community. It's huge, it overlooks the lake, and that parking lot is full every day of the week. It's amazing the things that happen in that library. So you're right, it's more than just books.
Every day, and I would venture to say every night, and that leads me to how we came to get to know each other. I was attending a meeting of the Mid-Hudson Library Board at the Mahopac Library, and I walked into the room where someone was setting up for a meeting, which I thought was going to be our meeting, and it was someone who looks quite a bit like you, actually. And you were setting up for the weekly meeting of the Mahopac Writers Group, and you started pitching me about the Writers Group. And I listened. I was polite. I didn't cut you off, and I listened to everything that you had to say. And it just so happened that I had started writing a couple of years ago because of a story that had found me. And so a couple of months after that, I'd been thinking about having encountered you. And I just thought, maybe I should just check it out.
And so you've been with us ever since.
It's been just about a year now, and I come as many Thursdays as I can.
I am always intrigued by your presence. Sometimes you're not there, and I say, "Where's Priscilla?" And they say, "Oh, England." I said, "England? Where's Priscilla?" "Oh, she has a big meeting tonight." I mean, you have your fingers in everything. You're everywhere, and I love that about you. And I love the fact that you say you're not a writer. You're a liar because you are a writer, and your writing is wonderful. Most recently, you've been involved in a project that is just amazing. You have decided that this gentleman in his 90s deserves to be recognized. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, let's back up just a little bit.
Okay, let's back up.
Because the story really goes back to about 2009.
Whoa.
My husband and I were traveling in England, in a part of England we had never been before, in southeast Kent. And
Kent?
I'm always the driver in England because I'm left-handed, so I think it's something about my brain. I'm able to handle that other side of the road. We were driving on our way to Canterbury, and it had to do with a film we had seen, which actually came out during World War II. I noticed an American flag flying by the side of the road, and I'm thinking, what is that? What is an American flag doing flying here? So I pulled over. We got out of the car, and we saw there was a very small but very poignant memorial to an American airman who had lost his life There was a little stone with a plaque,
Wow.
and the flag was flying, and there was a small notice board with just a few details about what had happened. This was a young man, a 24-year-old fellow named William Johnson from Minneapolis, and he was on one of the heavy bombardment missions prior to D-Day, flying over Europe. He was shot up, wounded, as were half his crew. He made it back across the English Channel to where the air base was, but didn't get as far as the air base. As soon as they crossed the English Channel and were over land, the plane burst into flames.
Oh my God.
And he ordered all of his crew to jump, which they did. The last one jumped at 700 feet, which is pretty close to the ground. As
Yeah.
some of my friends who have served in the Air Force tell me, the ground comes up pretty fast
Yeah.
at 700 feet. So he's still there at the controls, and he sees a little village. There's a school and a church, a school with children, and he tries to steer the plane away from the village so that nobody will be hurt. And of course, at this point, everything's happening so fast. He's on
Yeah.
one engine. He crashes and dies a crash landing.
My God.
And I read this small story about him, and I started thinking, I'm the mother of 3 sons. I'm thinking about, he was a kid. He was 24 years old. He might have had brothers and sisters. He surely had a mother and father. Who were they? How did he get there? How did he come to be in this place?
You are such a writer.
Wasn't writing at the time.
I know, but you were thinking like a writer. The story behind the story.
I needed to know, and I more than I needed to know, even then I think I realized that once I knew the story, I would want to share it and tell it in some way.
Yep.
So that was that, and life goes on.
So you did. I mean,
well,
did you?
What happened was, we got back home about a week later, and one of the first things I did was to Google the 447th Bomb Group, which was about the only piece of information that I had about him, other than his name and that he was from Minneapolis. And you can imagine, William Johnson in Minneapolis would be like finding John Smith in New York City. So I Googled the 447th Bomb Group, and immediately a website came up, and I discovered that the contact for the 447th Bomb Group is a woman that I sing with every Tuesday night in the Taconic Corral.
Oh my God! Oh, that's.
And I felt like someone was tapping me on the shoulder, saying, this story is reaching out to you and is telling you need to find this out. And it turns out that my friend, who I didn't know all that well at the time, Melanie Bussell, her husband, Norm Bussell, had flown from the same air base as this young man whose memorial I had found.
No coincidence.
And he's actually now 95 years old. He's written a book about his own experiences because he was shot down and spent most of the war in a POW camp. And both my friend Melanie and her husband Norm Bussell are working still to this day helping veterans get benefits, and they have a special group for ex-POWs that meets once a month, and I've become involved with that group also.
Wow.
So
that's
it's
amazing.
So
did you
really
get his
drew me
story?
Well, it's interesting. I tried to find William Johnson in Minneapolis, and that did not turn out to be very simple. I was able to find 2 William H. Johnsons, both born within 12 months of each other, but I didn't know which was the right one. So I had to pick one and hope for the best, but I wasn't making any progress. So my husband used to say I should have been a private eye or detective. I guess something motivated me to I just thought, I'm going to put this aside. I'm going to stop trying to find William Johnson's family. Instead, I'm going to focus on the crash scene. I will find out what happened over there. Maybe there were some local newspaper accounts. What other information can I find? So I made a cold call to a real estate agent in the area where the plane had crashed. And I got a young person on the phone. No, I don't know anything, but there's an old guy in the back. He might know something. So the old guy in the back got on the phone. No, I don't know anything, but you know what? There's a guy, he was sitting in the pub when these Americans came looking for where their relatives crashed. He might know something. Well, Ian Douglas, that guy that was sitting in the pub, is now a good friend of mine. And that person gave me the contact for as I refer to Bill Johnson, my pilot, gave me the contact for Bill Johnson's family. back in Minneapolis. And I was able to meet Bill's sister before she died in her late 80s.
Wow.
I have met Bill Johnson's nieces and nephews. And I've also met a whole other group at the airfield in Suffolk, England, which is quite a bit north of where Bill Johnson crashed. And I have gone over a couple of times to visit the airfield and get to know some of these people, including a gentleman who was 14 years old at the time. He was a kid bicycling home from school. And this
God.
Bill Johnson calls out, "Hey kid, do you know anyone who can do our laundry?" And this kid said, "Yes, I do." They needed the money. It was the war.
Sure,
and
it's the
and they
war.
could use every extra penny. And so this, can you imagine a job for a 14-year-old kid in the middle of war with these American flyboys? And he's riding back and forth every day delivering their laundry. And he got to know Bill Johnson quite well.
That is amazing.
So it's just
See,
been
that
it's
is
just
not-
been an incredible adventure.
That is not surprising. You know, when I was doing Hauntings of the Hudson River Valley, I got to know a number of paranormals. And it was fascinating to me because the stories behind the stories, I am convinced that these are people who cannot cross over until they resolve their lives here. And there's things here that they felt they had to do. And they contact people to help them get the answers that they needed answered when they died. You are one of those people that he had to use to get the information that he needed.
It's interesting that you say that, because my motivation in finding out all of this was really to give a voice to him and give him a little
Yes.
more of a life that he never
Yes.
had an opportunity to live.
I spent 20 years with Sybil doing the same thing.
And you've done such a
This
wonderful-
lady doesn't leave me alone. For 20 years she's been haunting me to get the story straight because her family was treated unjustly. Her son, who saved people's lives, or her grandson, was never even recognized. I mean, was recognized, yes, but recognized incorrectly. Sybil herself was credited with having 6 children. They were her son's children. She didn't want the credit for those children. They were her son's children. Her husband was a hero. No one even knew about it. This lady wasn't going to stay dead. She needed this story told. So does your William Johnson.
I have that feeling. And I also feel that in many ways, William Johnson has given me a gift because
He chose you.
because of exploring and trying to find out more about him and to tell his story. It occurred to me that it might be a good idea to learn how to string some words together and learn how to write. So I began, I had a bunch of family things going on that complicated my life for a while. So it really, I wasn't able to get serious about it until a couple of years ago. And I took a writing course, and I found that I really enjoyed it. And I've been trying different kinds
You've
of
been
writing.
wonderful in the group. I mean, the stories that you share and the way you write, you are, without a doubt, a writer, and a good writer.
Well, I had this discussion with one of my kids who, as I said to him, "Well, you really are a writer. I'm not a writer." And he said to me, "Well, then stop writing." And I thought about that for a minute.
Yeah,
I thought,
right.
I don't want to stop writing. He
Yeah.
said, "Well, then you're a writer."
Yeah, and that is a fact, and you know, I'm always fascinated by the little boy who came to me and said, "Mr. Dacquino, I want to be a writer, but how can you be a writer if your life is boring?" And I said to him, "Well, did you ever think about writing, instead of writing about what is, what about if you wrote about what if? Take some of the things that you see, stories, and embellish them, build on them. Let your imagination take you. And sometimes real life situations lend to wonderful stories that can come of it. Other times, there's people out there who never got to tell their story, and they use us. And I'm convinced that George Denny and Sybil and some of these people are writing through me. They know that that's my passion, and they're using their passion to get to mine. And they can write through me all day long if they want. I'm more than happy to lend myself to them. And
what you're saying is you're not just obsessed, you're possessed.
I'm possessed and obsessed. So that's the thing. Mm-hmm. And you have to recognize your calling. Well, you have a calling.
Well, I have to say that I'm enjoying it, and many thanks to you and others who are really promoting writers here in the Hudson Valley. Yeah. You with the Mahopac Writers Group, and
it's important.
John McMullen with the group in Shrub that meets at the wonderful. Poetry group. And
these are people who really, care about it. You've heard me say this before. I am a bibliotherapist. My master's degree, one of my master's degrees, was in reading and reading difficulties, and my thesis was on bibliotherapy, where I study literature and use literature as a tool for people who are going through a crisis in their life. So that what happens is they can identify with some of these characters, whether they're purely fictional or semi-fictional or real characters, real people. You identify with them and you understand that there's some qualities in you that you've never recognized, and that there's ways to surmount some of those horrible times in your life, and that you're not alone. And by using other characters and by using books, you can make your life better. And that's what it's all about. And William Johnson is trying to teach through you. He's trying to tell us something that he couldn't tell when he was alive. And he's using you to do it. So listen and understand that that's something that you need to do. And so does he.
I would take your bibliotherapy even a little further, at the risk of practicing without a license. I think that there is a real therapeutic aspect to language, just language itself.
Yes, speaking, writing, and reading.
Yes, speaking, writing, and reading, and thinking about what you see and hear. I remember as a small child, our dad would read to us. I was one of 6 children. And he read to us from the very earliest age, and we'd all be sitting together, a mixed age group that could range from a baby up to a 10-year-old when the last one was born. And I remember as a very young child hearing my dad read, and even before I understood what the words meant,
valuable.
I just heard the flow of it, the rhythm of it, the beauty of it. It was
love
musical.
Of language.
And that's exactly, it really did engender a real love of language. But I think just hearing that and being read to can be something that's very therapeutic and very inspiring.
Yeah. I remember Imus in the Morning, who sometimes was a little off the eccentric end, and he was a character. He was a news commentator for the radio, and all of a sudden his life changed. He became a father. And one of the things that he kept saying over and over again, and his wife would say, "Are you serious? You're reading books to our infant?" And he said, "Absolutely." He said, "I want him to hear language." And he would read to that infant. I am sure that what happened was that child, who knows, I've lost track. He's not even on the air anymore. But that kid had to have benefited from hearing that language at a very early age.
There's another point at which language becomes very important, and that's at the end of life. I was very privileged to be sitting at my mother's bedside in her own home when she died. And they say that hearing is the last sense to go. And my brothers and sisters and I read out loud, even though she didn't appear to be hearing.
Wow.
So even all through life, at the beginning, all through, and at the end.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's absolutely crucial. Now, I should point out, you were a teacher. Tell me a little bit about your teaching experience.
I was initially a teacher in Uganda in East Africa as part of the U.S. Peace Corps. I went into the Peace Corps after I graduated from college, and it was a wonderful experience.
Oh, wow.
I was teaching high school age kids, some of whom were almost as old as I was.
Wow,
And
really?
although I had some training, including some practice teaching in New York City, it was just a very brief training, but it was wonderful. And when I came back from the Peace Corps, I taught for about 3.5 years in the South Bronx and had a wonderful, really great experience.
There's something about teaching that's just, you know, that's one thing I always say. You know, I taught for 35 years, and people say, what did you bring back from that? I said that I was one of my students because I learned every day. I learned something new.
I feel that way too. I learn from my own children. I learn from anyone that I've ever taught. I mean, there's so much to be learned.
I have so many wonderful memories of, you know, of learning experiences from kids. The kids can teach you so much, and you have the power to inspire and be inspired. And that's the thing, and that's probably contributed to my wanting so badly to be a writer. Every kid is a story. Every person is a story. And you just need to know those stories. And it's just amazing.
Well, to know them and to tell them.
Yeah, there you go. So now you are doing some writing. You're doing the writing on William Johnson. Are you doing other writing?
I am. I write short pieces, mainly nonfiction. I've played a little bit with fiction just in short pieces projects for a course. But I'm usually just inspired by either something that's happening in my private life or just something that I see around me. It could be something very small.
So, big question for you. You're writing. I know you, Priscilla, and I know for a fact, and will be willing to bet, in your purse somewhere,
I know where this is coming.
There is some writing.
Oh,
Are you willing to share it?
I don't know that this is necessarily the time to share, but maybe another time.
Always
You can ask me next time.
Well, then tell me about those pieces. What are those pieces? What are they about? What kind of writing are you doing?
A lot of the first pieces that I started writing were coming from my own life experience. I had just experienced 2 major losses in my life.
Oh, wow.
And personal losses. And so I was writing to a prompt that was being given by a teacher, but somehow everything I wrote seemed to be filled with grief. And I actually found it extremely therapeutic, although it wasn't on the topic of grief specifically. But I found it just seems that everywhere I look now, there's a story.
Yeah, that is absolutely true.
Yeah,
and whether it's sad or not, you know, there's a story that's haunted me my entire life. When I first began teaching, I had a young girl in my class, Mary. And Mary wrote some poems. And one of the poems was about smoke and being overcome by smoke. And it was just an unusual poem. I believe I still have it. And 2 years later, the boiler malfunctioned under her bedroom, and she was killed.
Oh my gosh.
And it was my first loss as a teacher. It was devastating. And even though Mary was no longer in my class, I began to realize that all these kids in this room were risk factors. That at any time we could lose them, at any time something could happen. And they became people. They became children who hopefully would make it to adult. And I began seeing them as special kind of people. And Mary haunted me, literally haunted me for years. And I ended up writing a book called Mary Loved Daisies. And the book began with the what if. What if Mary had a boy she liked who was a wrestler? Remember, I was a wrestling coach in those early days. And what if that boy decided to go to a tournament that night instead of staying with Mary, and then she died, and how would he take it? And I wrote a book about the grieving stages and what it's like to lose someone you love. And realize the importance, again, of being a bibliotherapist. Mm-hmm. When kids at a young age lose somebody, they lose a part of themselves. And as a writer, I felt that I owed it to myself and to them to give them something that would make their life a little easier to live. Death hurts. And there's no question about it. And eventually you can get over it. But the hurt will always be there. Just helps to soothe it in some way.
Well, you were letting them know that they're not alone.
They're not alone, and that's important.
One of the things that I found in writing, when I start writing, is sometimes I'll just start thinking that I'm heading in a particular direction, and then the next thing I know, I'm lost. I'm in the middle of something, and it's almost like I wake up at the end of the writing and go back and look and see what I've written, and it isn't at all where I thought I was going.
In your writing of William Johnson, you help him, wherever he is, to know that he's not forgotten. Well, there's so many people out there who are so afraid that they will be forgotten, that once they leave, it's over. Maybe it isn't. And to give people that possibility that they won't be forgotten is a gift. It's a gift. And as a writer, you have that gift. And that's why you can never, Priscilla, call yourself not a writer. You are a writer. You have the heart of a writer. You have the spirit of a writer. And it is important. I am so thrilled that you walked into the wrong room that night.
So am I.
And was it coincidence? One of the first lines in Hauntings of the Hudson River Valley, there's no such thing as coincidence.
Well, I've heard that called synchronicity.
There's exactly
something,
right.
something
it is
there.
Synchronicity.
Yes.
It was meant to be, and it is. And you were meant to be here on this show today and to share that. So your final word to people is what, Priscilla?
I think I would say, look for the story. The stories are everywhere. I looked out my window once and saw a pigeon sitting on my deck, and I was thinking, what's a pigeon doing out in the woods? How come it's not on a window ledge in New York City or some other place? Or I saw the other day what I thought was chipmunks having a little Chipmunks Olympics, and it actually turned out to be a rabbit chasing a squirrel up a tree. I mean, there's a story there. A guy came up behind me in Grand Central Station last winter and said, "I don't want money, I just want something to eat." And I turned and I offered him food, and he said, "No, I want a hot dog." So I bought him a hot dog, and while they were fixing him the hot dog, he said I was in jail for 63 days. And then I offered him a beverage, and he was gone. It disappeared.
So here's Priscilla's message to you. Find the story you need to tell. It's out there, and it's waiting for you. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for being part of One-on-One with Vin Dacquino and Priscilla Goldfarb. Priscilla,
Good to see you
what
again.
A pleasure. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you so
your
much.
time with us today. Keep doing what you do. Say hello to William Johnson for me and all those people who should never, ever be forgotten.
Yeah, and there's so many
Thank
of them.
you for being part of
really.
it.
So, no, this was
You
great.
were